Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ad America. Yay! My name is Aninda, one of the guests here in Ad America, and I'm so glad to have you all here. First of all, I would like to welcome our friends from Universitas Muhammadiyah Jakarta. Woo! How is everyone doing? Doing good. Okay. And also, I would like to welcome our friends joining us online from various social media. Welcome, everyone. If you're new here at America is the US Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. On this event, we'll be continuing our series of Sustainable Development Goals Heroes. Is it too late to prevent climate change? On this discussion, we'll figure it out. But before we begin, how about we spice things up a little bit with a trivia for our social media friends? The question is, which of the following is the nature based solution to tackle the climate crisis? Is it A, mangroves, B, public transportation, C, recycle, or D, renewable energy? Well, take a guess and let us know your answer on our social media because in the end of the event, we'll do a live shout out for those of you who can guess the answer correctly. Other than that, feel free to take a selfie or maybe post your Instagram story and make sure you tag to our Instagram account. So without further ado, I'll pass the stage to our moderator. She is account director of Burson Cone and Wolf Indonesia. Please welcome Kak Rizkina Alia.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Nina. Thank you for having us here today at America. This is my third time here, and this is our final session for SDGs Heroes. And today, our theme is it too late to prevent climate change? After two sessions talking about SDGs, I can safely say that at America has probably saved the best for last. And this is probably one of my favorite and favorite subjects when we talk about SDGs. And I'm sure that you all also have plenty to contribute, plenty to ask our esteemed panel of speakers today. So without further ado, let me invite all our speakers. First off, we have Pak Rahman Kurniawan, Environmental Policy Specialist. He is the manager of SDG's Environment Development Pillar for the Ministry of National Development Planning. And he is also a former consultant to GIZ, a certified in technical advocacy for spatial planning and policy design, and a PhD in natural resources and environmental management from Institut Pertanian Bogor. Thank you for joining us today, Pak Rahman. Next, we have Pak Brian. He is Director of Environment Office USAID Indonesia. He is former helper to the government to combat trafficking of endangered species and former helper in Banda Aceh to support tsunami recovery programs, including strengthening local agribusinesses. A good mix. Yes. And last but not least, one of our speakers, our speaker for today is Mbak Dwi Payana or Mbak Nana, environmental and social consultant at Mott McDonald Indonesia. She is a former environmental and social safeguard specialist in coral reef rehabilitation and Coral Triangle Initiative, and former national and corporate partnership officer at Mercy Corps Indonesia. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bapak Ibu. All right. So maybe we'll set up some really like very ground rules before starting off. In terms of language, feel free to use any which language that you're most comfortable in answering with, and I'll help usher along the discussion. So we'll start off with a 30-minute discussion with our speakers, and then I expect you guys to jump in, ask questions, uh, share your thoughts. So I suppose we can just start, Bapak Ibu. Thank you. All right. So as I've mentioned before, the issue of climate change is probably one that is closest to my heart when we talk about sustainable development goals. But how big of a role does environmental sustainability and climate change mitigation play a part in the SDGs? Who wants to go first? Pak Rahman, perhaps?
Okay, from my side. Uh, Thank you Mbak Nana. Uh, Mbak Nina.
Mbak
Mbak
Nana.
Nana.
Mirip,
Tukar.
tapi berbeda sedikit, Pak.
Allow me to deliver my explanation in bahasa to make more clearly because sometimes in English I have lagging in the term of terminology like that. Oke, terima kasih Mbak Nana, Pak Brian, Nina. Eh, Climate change di Indonesia tentu sangat penting isunya, sehingga eh, itu harus lakukan upaya-upaya untuk mengurangi dampak maupun mengurangi hal-hal lain yang bisa mengganggu kehidupan masyarakat. Oleh karena itu pemerintah sangat concern terhadap climate change. Sehingga secara holistik, integratif, pendekatan yang pertama adalah, memasukkan ke dalam agenda pembangunan pemerintah. Because, pemerintah adalah aktor utama dalam pembangunan. Tetapi, terutama setelah adanya SDGs, kita sadar bahwa upaya itu tidak cukup, perlu juga melibatkan, para pihak di luar pemerintah. Dalam SDGs kita kenal 4 platform yang, secara holistik, mengerjakan agenda pembangunan untuk tujuan bersama. Selain pemerintah kita punya, eee, kita sebut non state actor ya, adalah, NGO, masyarakat sipil, kemudian juga ada akademisi dan pakar, ada juga pelaku usaha dan, filantropi yang kita minta juga dukungannya, serta tentu saja, para pihak di luar itu, termasuk, media, dan semua pihak lainnya. Nah, jadi untuk, climate change, pemerintah mengawalinya dari sisi pemerintah, memasukkan ke dalam agenda pembangunan, berkelanjutan, kira-kira seperti itu. Setelah itu kita mengajak, non pemerintah untuk terlibat untuk mengisi gap, eee, yang tidak bisa dikerjakan hanya oleh pemerintah, termasuk, peran, nanti para pembicara lain. Itu mungkin sementara.
All right, thank you, Paraman. So basically, integrating the climate change agenda into the government development agenda, and then uh, branching out and reaching out to other non-state actors so that they can contribute to
Iya.
the effort lebih jauh gitu ya, Pak. Oke, Mbak Nana or Pak Brian?
Okay, thank you, Manina, for the question. I think I will answer in English or maybe mix with also with Bahasa. So I think the environmental sustainability or climate change is really important for the whole SDGs. What I learned from the SDG Academy training, I'm one of the alumni for the SDG Academy training. That SDG use like a nested model, so it is kind of like circle. The first inner circle is economic related goals, and then the next bigger circle is society or social related goals, and the biggest circle is economic. Oh, sorry, is environmental related goals, which also include the goals number 13 regarding the climate action. So economic and social is actually part of the biggest circle in environment. So actually it is not separated, and it cannot be it cannot be separated. And in order to achieve the goals related to economic and also society, we also need to achieve goals related to environment or related to climate change. I mean, um, uh, imagine it is really hard to achieve goals related to, for example, good health and well-being, or, for example, economic growth, if we have a climate disaster throughout the years, throughout our lives. So, yeah, actually, the climate change or environmental sustainability is kind of the ceiling of the overall SDGs.
That's very interesting. I think Pak Brian, perhaps you want to add more to that.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mbak Nana, I like your ideas of the circles. Saya mohon maaf ya, saya berbicara bahasa Inggris ya. This is the extent of my bahasa, so I'm going to stick to English. I really like the visual that you're providing there, because to me, let me step back and say, the millennial challenge goals, right? Those were focused probably before everyone's time, but they were focused on poverty eradication, right? And then as the SDGs were developed, the focus was on a number of other areas, including climate change and poverty eradication. But to me, climate change is should be at the center of all the other goals, right? Because it is impacted by the other goals and it impacts the other goals, right? On issues around food security, water scarcity, land use. To address climate change, we need partnerships We need to be working. We need to find economic opportunities for youth, which are probably going to be an innovation that addresses issues around climate change. SDG 13 around climate change and climate action, I think it needs to be the center of the SDGs, and frankly, I think is an overarching SDG that impacts all the other ones. And so, when we talk about poverty, economic development, um, climate change is going to exacerbate the issues around poverty and decrease the economic opportunities, particularly for the most vulnerable. And so, therefore, you really need to address the underlying issues of poverty, which is access to resources, access to land, access to water, to ensure that people have the resilience to adjust to issues of climate change, extreme weather events such as droughts and floods. And so, again, my point of in Nina's point of Nana's point, excuse me, is ensuring that we're addressing climate change and all the drivers of climate change, so that we can address the other SDGs as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's a great. I totally agree with Pak Brian in a sense. Mbak Nana's visualization is very apt. Cocok banget untuk menggambarkan betapa pentingnya isu perubahan iklim ini gitu. Karena seringkali dan ini yang aku anggap ya dan yang mungkin ini yang kita alami juga, people see climate change or environmental issues as something separate from issues of poverty um, and something that you think of later in life when your country has developed enough. So the fact that it's all nested together, it's all related, is a great foundation to kick off our discussion today. And speaking of that, how do you all think we can contextualize climate goals across different countries, ambitions, and development goals? Mungkin nanti Pak Rahman bisa sharing di Indonesia sendiri tuh gimana caranya sih mengkontekstualisasikan kepentingan iklim di agenda pembangunan Indonesia, mungkin PR-nya masih lebih banyak gitu Pak. And Pak Brian can also share about how that works out in context of the US, say, and how it affects their partnership with other countries. Perhaps Pak Rahman or Pak Brian want to kick off, and then Banana can jump into.
Silakan. Oh,
Ya udah Pak Rahman
oke,
dulu.
ya. Seperti berurutan terus.
Iya.
Eh, eh, Seperti yang saya sampaikan tadi, ada beberapa isu yang di mainstream dalam development agenda, our development agenda. Salah duanya adalah SDGs dan climate change. Jadi bersamaan menjadi mainstream dalam agenda pembangunan jangka menengah kita. Artinya mainstream adalah mengarus utamakan. Jadi mainstream itu kalau bahasa sederhana yang sering saya jelaskan adalah mengajak semua pihak terlibat, walaupun para pihak itu bukan urusan utamanya yang ngurusin itu. Kira-kira seperti itu. Jadi pemerintah tuh pendekatannya ada by sektor, artinya climate itu adalah pembangunan yang melibatkan semua sektor. Seperti yang Pak Brian sampaikan. Jadi dia terkait dengan kemiskinan, dia terkait dengan lingkungan, dia terkait dengan ekonomi. Oleh karena itu di mainstream dalam agenda pembangunan kita, di arus utamakan bersama-sama dengan SDGs. Termasuk juga mainstream itu digambarkan dalam model-model perencanaan pembangunan Bappenas yang menunjukkan bahwa climate action dalam goal 13 ini terkait dengan banyak sekali goals lainnya, sektor-sektor yang ada di agenda pembangunan. Kira-kira seperti itu. Jadi kalau kita lihat studi atau kajian di tingkat global sekalipun ya, awalnya climate action ini di studi salah satunya yang kami pelajari interlinkages antar goals itu adalah yang dilakukan I guess misalnya di Jepang. Awal studi mereka hanya melakukan kajian ternyata climate action terkait beberapa goal saja. Kemudian hari ini kajian mereka sudah meluas, ternyata terkait semua goal seperti yang diceritakan Pak Brian. Jadi artinya not common sense. We have a academical approach to describe how important the climate action in the development agenda kira-kira seperti itu. Sehingga pemerintah melibatkan semua sektor, melibatkan semua daerah, region untuk terlibat, eh, bahkan melibatkan aksi-aksi non pemerintah. Jadi kalau pemerintah kan hanya bisa mengatur dirinya sendiri memerintahkan. Ke tempat yang lain adalah mengajak di luar pemerintah. Oleh karena itu pada saat Perpres tentang SDGs dicanangkan, keterlibatannya peraturan presiden harusnya kan mengatur kementerian lembaga, tapi di dalamnya melibatkan non state actor untuk terlibat. Itu pengetahuan saya adalah peraturan yang lintas government yang pertama di inisiatif. Nah, untuk memperkuat itu juga di tahun 2017 ada peraturan presiden terkait dengan pelaksanaan pencapaian SDGs nomor 59 tahun 2017. Bulan kemarin kita sudah melakukan updating peraturan presiden. We have the new regulation from our president terkait dengan achievement of SDGs melalui peraturan presiden nomor 111, jadi angka cantik ya, nomor 11 tahun 2022 yang ditetapkan bulan September. Jadi press from the open. We have several strengthening in this regulation. We have the enabler condition to strengthen in our development agenda, not only from regulation, but from the financing and from the collaboration, and then about the innovation. That is the last condition in Indonesia, Mbak Nina. Ya, Mbak Nina.
All right, thank you so much, Pak Rahman. I think your point about mainstreaming the climate agenda is critical into contextualizing the agenda within Indonesia karena pada akhirnya ya untuk dipahami harus dikenal dulu ya Pak dan itu harus dikenal di semua sektor dan makanya itu bisa melibatkan dan harus melibatkan semua pihak. Setuju. Pak Brian perhaps?
Sure. Thank you. So contextualize climate. What does climate change mean to each country, each individual? It is different, right? And what climate change means in the United States, in Indonesia, or in Africa is very different. But I think we're all need to be on the same path, right? Um, and that's to look at ourselves, what we can do better to address climate change, and then what can we do to help others. I think there's an opportunity to learn from other countries, whether you're quote unquote developed or developing, which I don't really like that term when it comes to climate change because it suggests that one country is already figured out and others are still trying to figure out, but that is not the case. There are certainly opportunities for countries, the wealthy, the developed countries, to learn from those that are still on that path towards development, to see how they're doing addressing issues around climate change, because each country is in a different position on that path. For the United States, we've it comes down to politics and policy making, right? With President Biden coming in 2020, we certainly saw a shift and a greater emphasis on climate change. And you know, the people that elected President Biden, they did it for many reasons, but certainly there were those who wanted a greater emphasis on climate change. And what we're seeing now in the United States is the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a new law that is putting investment and into electric vehicles, clean energy, encouraging others to address climate change in a productive way. So what other countries could be doing the same thing is advocacy for climate action in your own country. So um, you know the role that the people play, civil society, to try to encourage your policymakers to take action is critical. And I think there's an opportunity for the United States to learn from what's going on in Indonesia and vice versa, to see how the policies that are in action and how that impacts climate change is critical. So, we're all on a different path, but we all need to be going in the same direction. So, there's plenty of opportunities to learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Banana?
maybe I will add what Pak Brian and Pak Rahman already said. So actually, I agree with Pak Brian that each country needs to translate their own goals related to climate change because there is no like one solution fits all for the climate change issue. So, for example, in Indonesia, I know that we have a commitment to reduce emission from the five main sector. Um, it is land use and energy, waste, and um,
For
industry.
this
Apa?
agenda,
Yeah, yeah,
industry and
yeah,
blue
industry. So,
economy.
because we have potential to reduce emission from that sector, so each country will know better which one or which sector they will contribute to emission reduction. So yeah, I think that's all.
All right, thank you. Um, so I think the keyword again, Mbak Nana kind of summed it up for us here. No, there is no one solution fits all when it comes to climate change. And I know you guys have a list of questions that I've sent over before, but let me just mix it up a bit. As in that sense, then in Indonesia, why do you think we have to be concerned about climate change, and specifically within the Indonesian context? Kenapa itu jadi penting buat kita di Indonesia? Mungkin I'm going to mix it up. So the row, we're gonna mix it up. How about banana? You go first.
Okay. So the climate change issue is really important, particularly for we as Indonesian, because we know that there is each country or each area that is vulnerable to the impact of climate change. It is a coastal country. Maybe you already heard information in the next several years, some of the city in coastal area will be sink due to the climate change or sea level rise. So yeah, Indonesia has a lot of coastal, and it is also because Indonesia is, I think, middle income country. So we also vulnerable with the impact of the climate change. So that's why we actually all of us in the planet, particularly we as in Indonesia, because uh, I see that all of you are the college student. We need to yeah, address the climate change issue because we are actually a vulnerable country.
Understood. All right. Pak Brian, would you like to add to that from your experience?
Sure. Well, first, building on what about Nana was saying, I was flying into Jakarta a couple days ago, and as you fly in, right, you see how low land, right? It's at sea level. It might be even below sea level, and so just the smallest a meter, half a meter of sea level rise is going to have a tremendous impact on that land, those people that live there. And so, you can see that there's agriculture activities going on there, but with any level, any amount of sea level rise, they'll lose their economic livelihood. So the vulnerability is absolutely correct. Uh, such a huge percentage of the population that lives along the coast. Um, we're seeing already extreme weather events right now. Right, I don't think there was a dry season this past year. Right, more rainfall, more flooding. We're seeing it in Jakarta, but of course it's happening in other parts of Indonesia. And so the need for adaptation, building resilience of communities, and frankly, there's a lot of poor communities that are living along riverbeds that are being flooded, that need to, um, I don't know what the solution is, but they need to adapt. And the government, the private sector, donor organizations like USAID should be supporting that adaptation uh, with policy, with better infrastructure, whatever it may be, so that those communities are more resilient to these severe weather events. But also on the mitigation side, Indonesia is blessed with significant natural resources, forest resources, the gambut, the peatland, the mangroves. They sequester so much carbon. that really prevents a lot of greenhouse gases from being emitted, and of course the changing climate. So working with the government of Indonesia, the local government as well as the national government to preserve and conserve that forest, that peatland, those mangroves is critical, and the government is making inroads on doing that, replanting um, mangroves, re-wetting peatland, but there's so much more that can be done. But doing that, you need to also ensure that there are livelihoods for the communities that depend on that land. So that's where the sustainable forest management comes into play, right? There are you don't have to set aside forest and say do not touch it, but there's a way to ensure that you manage that forest in a sustainable way so that communities still get their livelihoods. And so USAID working with the government, the local government, with the private sector and civil society, we're trying to ensure that livelihoods are still intact, but we're also protecting the most high conservation, high carbon stock forests that Indonesia is blessed with. So Indonesia is going to have to adapt to climate change, and Indonesia has a significant leadership role in ensuring that we keep um, the temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius in line with the Paris Agreement. So Indonesia is on the front line, certainly, of climate change.
Thank you, Pak Brian Banana. That was a great point, a great perspective. We listen a lot about how Indonesia as a country, uh, kita takut menghadapi perubahan iklim gitu, karena perubahan iklim memiliki dampak yang buruk. But I think Pak Brian has also highlighted that we have the potential to play a bigger role, and I think that's very refreshing. Thank you, Pak. Pak Rahman, silakan Pak.
Uh, thank you, Mbak Nina. I think Pak Brian and Mbak Nana have clearly described the condition in Indonesia. But maybe I will add some condition, uh, like Pak Brian and Mbak Nana mentioned before. Climate will trigger uh, several disaster, collateral disaster, like including Pak Brian mentioned before. Uh, we have landslide triggered by the extreme weather like that. But regularly we have uh, extreme condition like La Nina and El Nino when ketika uh, tadi terjadi musim basah sangat kuat, ada landslide, ada banjir dan seterusnya. Jangan lupa juga ketika musim kering yang sangat ekstrim juga trigger eh, forest fire, kebakaran hutan dan seterusnya. Termasuk juga mengancam pertanian sebagai sumber daya pangan kita, ketahanan pangan kita. Seluruh yang dijelaskan Mbak Nana dan Pak Brian itu adalah kondisi pengelolaan SDG sesungguhnya karena lintas sektor, lintas goal dan seterusnya. Nah, tetapi spesifik in Indonesia, jika di negara-negara maju industri dan energi menjadi proporsi terbesar untuk penyumbang gas rumah kaca, di Indonesia justru yang terbesar dari lahan. Oleh karena itu seperti Pak Brian bilang, kita harus berusaha untuk mengkonservasi kondisi hutan kita karena itu sumbangannya sangat besar dalam mitigasi perubahan iklim. Selain tentu saja di bidang energi, kemudian industri dan juga waste ya, sampah kira-kira seperti itu. Nah, untuk saat ini dari banyak studi juga kita tahu bahwa konservasi karbon itu bisa dilakukan di area bukan hanya di daratan, di laut. Oleh karena itu mainstream tadi yang disampaikan oleh Mbak Nana tadi, sektor yang sekarang mulai didorong untuk menjadi konservasi yang diharapkan itu seperti yang Pak Brian sampaikan adalah dari marine and coastal area. This is the new issues to develop uh, the agenda to combating the climate change in Indonesia. Itu mungkin dari kalau melihat pola pentingnya saya kira nanti kita lihat pada saat hujan, kemudian tadi yang saya ceritakan kekeringan, not only kerusakan atau bencana alam, tapi juga bahkan bisa sampai pada sisi kesehatan karena menimbulkan outbreak penyakit-penyakit pada saat terjadi cuaca ekstrim. Jadi tidak hanya natural hazard, tapi collateral damage-nya bisa bisa sampai lebih jauh. Kira-kira seperti itu. Termasuk after flooding selalu akan ada kerentanan terhadap sanitasi dan kesehatan.
Right. Thank you, Pak Rahman. Well, I have two more questions before then we can, interact with kakak-kakak yang ada di sini. My first, my next question is, uh, what are the current major challenges in realizing environmental sustainability and mitigating climate change? And how has the pandemic played a part in that? Has it exacerbated things? Has it made it worse? Bagaimana sih pengaruh pandemi dalam, menghadapi tantangan perubahan iklim di Indonesia dan sebenarnya mungkin di luar negeri juga ya secara global. Mungkin itu pertanyaan aku. Um, ada yang mau duluan lagi? Anybody wants to go first? Any volunteers this time, or do I have to cold call another round? Pak Brian mungkin.
Sure, I'll try. I'll try. Um, the first question: challenges to addressing climate change and sustainability, right? Uh, um, let's see. I think the private sector can play a tremendous role in addressing climate change. That being said, trying to shift the way the private sector thinks is difficult. That takes a lot of time. But I guess I'm trying to say the private sector can influence policy action, right? You need the private sector, the government, and community, NGO, civil society all working together. And that partnership building takes time. So I'm just trying to think here. Getting everybody on the same page in a coordinated way is difficult. Coordination and collaboration is difficult. You typically do see civil society and NGOs saying we need climate action, but sometimes that doesn't always reach the government, and sometimes you need to have the private sector with their investment and their money to also be pushing in the same direction. The private sector needs to see that there is value in transitioning the way they do business, whether it's in transitioning from fossil fuels to solar and clean energy, um, looking at forest management activities, whether it's in pulp and paper, palm oil, seeing that it is profitable to put more forest aside for conservation, for ecosystem services, and having sustainable management of forests, so that we're all working together to influence the policymakers, right? So my point being is it's not always top down. Sometimes it has to be bottom up with civil society, NGOs, working with the private sector to influence the leaders, the political leaders, to make that change. And so it takes time, and it takes time. It takes effort, and frankly, probably takes a lot of money as well. So that's something that I've seen from a donor perspective, from USAID's perspective, is that we cannot do it alone. We can't just go say, USA, let's work with the civil society groups and influence. No, we need the private sector, and we can't just work with the private sector. We need civil society also as well working with the government. So teamwork is hard work, but it's in the long run that's what's essential. Let me pause on there and to let others. Some questions about COVID and how things change. I'll defer to see what my colleagues have to say as well. So, thank you.
Mbak Nana mungkin?
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with Pak Brian that actually the most challenging part is because the climate change is a global issue. Actually, the climate change is global issue is also can be the opportunity as well. But in this case, um, yeah, all of the country and all of the stakeholder need to address this issue together. So we cannot just rely on, for example, some group of country to tackle this issue, and we also cannot just rely on maybe for government to tackle this issue, and the private sector or the community didn't do nothing about the climate change. We cannot do that because this is the yeah, because this is the global issue. And then I think the next challenges for the climate change issue is regarding the global acceptance, because yeah, I mean, how can we address the climate change issue and with the solution if some of us still don't really believe that climate change is really happening now, not in the future, not in the maybe 100 years in the future. Yeah, the climate change is really happening now. I think yeah, that is for the challenges.
Thank you, Mbak Nana and Pak Ryan. I think uh, I want to describe the nexus from the COVID pandemic and the uh, environmental condition. Jadi pada saat awal-awal pandemi, secara lingkungan sebenarnya ada tren membaik. Tren membaik karena misalnya ada lockdown, ada pembatasan transport. Eh, Mungkin pada saat puncak-puncak pandemi, teman-teman di sini yang tinggal di Jakarta melihat langit Jakarta lebih biru, more more clear, more blue, dan kualitas udara terbukti terukur membaik di Jakarta. Termasuk juga di beberapa negara, beberapa habitat eh, spesies terancam punah membaik karena tidak ada aktivitas ekstraktif terhadap banyak hal. Tetapi pada saat yang sama eh, aktivitas untuk mitigasi maupun adaptasi perubahan iklim juga terbatas juga, terjadi trade off antar. Oleh karena itu, belajar dari pandemi kita mencoba lebih jauh bahwa upaya-upaya pembangunan harus tetap jalan, tetapi pada saat yang sama lingkungan harus membaik seperti pada saat Covid, kira-kira seperti itu. Nah, eee, sebagai masyarakat dunia, ternyata bersama-sama masyarakat dunia kita punya terobosan, terutama dari inovasi, teknologi, dan seterusnya. Mungkin dulu kita tidak bisa eee, outreach banyak orang pada seminar seperti ini. Sekarang mungkin yang di online eee, lebih banyak daripada yang hadir di sini. Hal-hal semacam itu juga terjadi. Jadi ada nexus antara pandemi dan kondisi, termasuk eee, tentu saja climate change because eee, gas emission eee eee, ketika terjadi lockdown itu turun drastis, kira-kira seperti itu. Jadi ada sisi mitigasi yang dipaksa terjadi, tapi pada saat yang sama upaya-upaya untuk melakukan kegiatan eee, mengurangi dampak climate juga berkurang. Nah, oleh karena itu model yang diperkirakan dikembangkan saat ini, eee, emisi kita itu kira-kira akan mencapai peak di 2030, dan dengan kondisi seperti itu, dengan kondisi base business as usual jauh, itu 2030 nanti akan mulai bisa ditekan dengan pendekatan-pendekatan tadi, dari sektor energi, dari industri hijau, dari transformasi ekonomi, dari kondisi-kondisi seperti itu. Nah, pada saat pandemi juga ketika kondisi lingkungan membaik, tapi ada satu sisi yang relatif memburuk secara cepat. Misalnya sampah rumah sakit dan kesehatan. Eee, the waste production meningkat di Jakarta itu hampir 10 kali lipat dari kondisi biasa. Masker yang kita pakai dulu mungkin tidak banyak mengenal, itu menjadi sampah yang luar biasa. Tetapi kondisinya sekarang sudah mulai menurun karena intensif penggunaan alat-alat kesehatan akibat Covid sudah mulai berkurang juga. Jadi itu kondisi yang ada yang sekarang dijadikan trade off untuk dikelola dalam development agenda. Kira-kira seperti itu, Mbak.
Oke, menarik. Mbak Nana mau menambahkan?
Yeah, I think I would like to add Pak Rahman explanation. So from the pandemic, I think yeah, we can learn something from the pandemic, that actually during the very tragic circumstances, uh, actually we can change our old behavior. For example, like now we use or bring mask every day, and also hand sanitizer, and do the social distancing, and etc. to adapt the COVID-19. So I think it can also be done with the climate change. We can change our old behavior to have for example, low carbon activities. Yeah, in the future. Yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah, I'll just add to, yeah, I think the pandemic, um, you know, as we're talking about, there was a decrease of economic activity, and yeah, the blue skies in Jakarta and everything. And sometimes I feel that gives people a false sense of if we just don't do anything, everything will be better. Um, I think there's still a need, still a need for climate action, for people to be champions, um, and because, well, that is not normal, right? With lack of economic activity, there was no one was flying anywhere, and so forth and so on. But the pandemic also, right? I think Pak Rahman was highlighting of waste management, and people are ordering food in the United States. We're ordering all our stuff from online and clothes and everything, and there's a lot more waste going on, and a lot of it that's plastic waste. So I don't know the impact of on climate change, but certainly on the environment, on the ability to manage all that plastic, it has me concerned when I order my sushi from Gojek, that is wrapped in a plastic and wrapped in a paper bag and plastic bag and so forth. Um, I think, oh, that I just throw that away. I don't. That's not great. But I think we'll come up with solutions to recycle that type of plastic, and so forth and so on. And I'm sure people will be making adjustments to address the new way of doing business under post pandemic.
All right, thank you, Bapak Ibu. Final question. I would like to think that I saved the best question for last, but this question really intends to tie up all the key messages that Pak Rahman, Banana, and Pak Brian has, from the beginning, you guys have shared. And so my question is, uh, how does multi-stakeholder partnership actually help mitigate climate change? And I would love to hear from, like, have different answers, aka from different perspectives, like from USAID and the US government, from the Indonesian government, from the private sector, and also if you have experiences with grassroots communities and how you have seen they could play a part in mitigating climate change. Balik ke Pak Rahman dulu mungkin.
Thank you. Uh, uh, the multi-stakeholder partnership is one of our priority in SDGs implementation, because uh, in SDGs principle we have principle no one left behind. It means not only from for the beneficiaries, but for the actor to achieve the SDGs. That's why the government always need support from the non-state actor to uh, make some collaborate action to implement the SDGs, including the climate action. I think. Jadi sangat penting. Oleh karena itu menjadi bagian penguatan regulasi tadi. Jadi regulasi termasuk juga pada tingkat tapak. Tahun ini Bappenas akan mengadakan SDGs Annual Conference yang di dalamnya ada SDGs Action Award. Kita memanggil berbagai pihak yang memiliki best practices dalam pencapaian SDGs. Ternyata sebenarnya sudah mulai tahun lalu, tapi tahun ini kita formalkan dalam award yang formal. Dari banyak aksi yang terkumpul, ternyata banyak sekali upaya masyarakat dan kolaborasi dengan berbagai pihak dalam pencapaian SDGs, termasuk dalam climate action. Jadi misalnya dari sisi mitigasi, banyak yang misalnya di salah satu daerah di Jambi itu ada daerah remote yang tidak bisa tersentuh oleh listrik. Listrik. Ternyata dengan kita istilahnya KMP ya, kemitraan multi pihak atau multi stakeholder partnership, eee, kerjasama antara pemerintah, termasuk Bappenas dengan masyarakat lokal, dengan pemerintah daerah, dengan Bank Jambi, termasuk donor salah satunya waktu itu adalah UNDP, termasuk juga dari Basnas, dari semacam filantropis berbasis agama, membangun yang namanya microhydro. Microhydro itu ternyata bisa mengaliri listrik di beberapa desa dengan puluhan kepala keluarga. Secara mitigasi itu mengurangi pemakaian energi kalau mereka menggunakan bahan bakar kayu dan seterusnya. Pada saat yang sama pendidikan relatif lebih baik karena mereka bisa belajar pada kondisi yang mendapat penerangan dan seterusnya. Aktivitas ekonomi bisa berjalan tidak hanya di siang hari, malam hari dan seterusnya. Ini adalah salah satu contoh multi stakeholder partnership yang berhasil. Termasuk misalnya saat ini di Bangka Belitung, di Belitung ada kawasan mangrove yang dekat dengan pertambangan, rusak sekali karena dulu Belitung itu rusak dengan pertambangan timah. Saat ini ternyata dari sisi pemandangan, bekas galian itu menimbulkan pemandangan yang cukup unik karena airnya biru dan seterusnya. Kemudian ketika ada donor yang mau bekerja sama dengan masyarakat, dibantu oleh pemerintah dan seterusnya, itu bisa mengkonservasi mangrove tersebut dan ditata menjadi kawasan wisata. Dari sisi mitigasi, kita menambah luasan mangrove untuk mengkonservasi karbon. Dari sisi ekonomi, masyarakat mendapat penghasilan baru dari kegiatan pariwisata. Dari sisi pendidikan, mereka terinfluence dengan komunikasi dengan banyak pihak dan seterusnya. Saya kira banyak sekali dan itu contohnya hari ini kita sedang saring ada ratusan calon-calon best practices yang dimasukkan termasuk juga misalnya kegiatan-kegiatan di berbagai wilayah di luar Jawa ya di Papua itu banyak sekali yang memasukkan ternyata banyak sekali aksi yang kita di pusat memang harus down to earth melihat ke aksi-aksi itu ternyata eh, seperti yang Pak Brian bilang seringkali inovasi itu tidak selalu top down banyak yang bottom up yang menjadi oleh karena itu kita sebut sebagai eh, lesson learn best practices untuk bisa di coping di daerah lain dan tentu kita harus beri rewards untuk itu oleh karena itu di tahun ini mudah-mudahan nanti di akhir Desember kami undang semua pihak untuk hadir di SDGs Annual Conference karena itu adalah hajatannya SDGs setiap tahun di dalamnya ada SDGs Action Award termasuk juga ada slot untuk SDGs Festival untuk youth untuk teman-teman mahasiswa dan pemuda itu mungkin dari pengalaman kita di implementasi SDGs.
Thank you, Pak Rahman. It's so encouraging to listen to concrete examples that are being um, executed di lapangan ya Pak. Pak Brian mungkin?
Sure. So building on Pak Rahman's answer a little bit, for USAID, our first partner is the government of Indonesia. We're here because the government of Indonesia asked us for assistance, and we partner with the government. We are not. It is not a donor-recipient relationship. It is a partnership, and so, we design programs together. We go out to the field. We monitor programs together. We identify where are the areas where we want to work in partnership, and then we implement the programs together. So, but our programs are not focused on Jakarta; they're focused on the field. So when we go out to a place like Pontianak, Kuburaya, we do so with our government of Indonesia partners. I go out there with a counterpart at Bapanas, for example, at the director level, and we meet with the Bupati for example, in Kuburaya. We go out to the local villages, the desa, and meet with Kapala Desa. We work with private companies in the pulp and paper industry or kalapa sawit. And so, it, again, as I was saying before, there's no solution that USAID has alone. It has to be in partnership at a multi-stakeholder level. First and foremost with the government of Indonesia, and then it has to get down to the bottom to the citizens of Indonesia who are.
Oke,
uh, we are in here now. America is a great country, is a big country. Tapi ada nggak uh, di negara bagian Amerika yang iklimnya mirip seperti di Indonesia? Let's say Florida or maybe San Francisco. We know because I never been there. I never been your country. I don't want to visit your country. Uh, that's for me. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you Mbak Mutia. Alright. Masnya tadi, silakan.
My name is Aryan Lesmana Putra. I'm a student in University Muhammadiyah of Jakarta. I have two questions. I will use bahasa. Bagaimana cara kita sebagai negara berkembang? Negara berkembang pasti menuju menjadi negara maju ya. Sedangkan negara maju itu diindikasikan dengan negara-negara yang memiliki banyak industri seperti itu. Sedangkan industri membutuhkan berbagai macam lahan tempat pabrik-pabrik industri didirikan, yang artinya di situ merusak lingkungan, yang dimana lingkungan dengan iklim sangat berkaitan. Bagaimana caranya gitu ya, negara berkembang seperti kita yang ingin menjadi negara maju, tapi selalu membersamai dalam menjaga lingkungan di tengah perkembangan negara kita. Itu yang pertama. Yang kedua, negara-negara maju banyak mengajak negara-negara berkembang untuk menjaga lingkungan demi melindungi dari perubahan iklim. Negara-negara maju itu menggandeng negara-negara berkembang yang seperti di Asia dan Amerika Selatan yang masih memiliki banyak hutan. Sedangkan negara maju juga yang menginvestasikan pertambangan-pertambangan di Indonesia. Seperti yang tadi Bapak bilang di Bangka Belitung itu kan ada investasi asing. Ya, di Amerika yang dari Freeport sekarang di Papua investasi asing juga. Bagaimana mereka itu seperti berlawanan gitu. Ada yang ayo menjaga lingkungan, ayo merusak lingkungan, mengambil harta benda di negara-negara berkembang. Seperti itu, Pak. Thank you.
Alright, great questions here. Dari Mbak Mutia, maaf ya kalau aku menyingkat-nyingkat, siapa tahu benar namanya. Mbak Mutia, hubungannya mungkin climate change and global warming. And then a very personal question to Pak Brian about which states have similar climates to Indonesia. And dari Mas Aryan, Mas Aryan, how to balance industry and environmental sustainability, especially since we are a developing country. And at the same time, how do we, balance between the agendas of quote unquote developed countries that encourages climate change mitigation, but at the same time also encouraging extractive investments in developing countries. So I think those two questions are quite similar about balancing two different opposing agendas, economy and environment. Kayaknya Pak Rahman udah siap untuk menjawab. Silakan Pak Rahman duluan.
Baik, terima kasih. Mungkin yang pertama terkait dengan global warming dan climate change ya. Sebenarnya sebelum mengenal climate change mungkin orang dulu dengarnya global warming gitu. Jadi itu sebenarnya hubungan kausalitas ya yang dalam satu isu yang sama. Jadi sebenarnya global warming itu adalah pemanasan global yang diakibatkan lepasnya emisi gas rumah kaca ke udara. Jadi seperti makanya disebut gas rumah kaca, seperti bangunan kaca kalau kena matahari dia masuk panasnya nggak bisa keluar lagi. Jadi makin menghangat, bumi kita makin menghangat. Tapi hangatnya bumi ini 1-2 derajat juga berpengaruh terhadap iklim dan cuaca. Oleh karena itu terjadi akibat pemanasan global itu terjadi perubahan-perubahan iklim yang kita kenal sebagai climate change. Nah, ternyata climate change itu ada dampak buruknya yang paling besar terhadap kehidupan manusia. Oleh karena itu menjadi penting, karena menjadi penting itu kita kan tidak bisa merubah climate-nya ya. Salah satu caranya ya tentu harus mengurangi pemanasan globalnya. Itu yang kita sebut sebagai mitigasi. Tapi kan sekarang climate change-nya sudah berjalan. Karena sudah berjalan, sambil kita ngurangin terus pemanasan global yang mengakibatkan climate change, kita juga harus beradaptasi. Oleh karena itu dalam combating the climate change itu ada dua istilah, mitigasi dan adaptasi yang paling utama. Jadi mitigasi mengurangi supaya pemanasan globalnya berkurang, adaptasi supaya kita beradaptasi terhadap kondisi yang ada di climate change. Kata kuncinya biasanya secara cepat kita sebut adalah avoid an unmanageable condition. Jadi menghindari sesuatu yang tidak bisa kita atur, itu makanya adaptasi. Dan memanage apa yang tidak bisa kita hindari. Jadi seperti dua kata antara mitigasi dan adaptasi. Jadi bicara mitigasi hari ini di agenda pembangunan kita ternyata tidak cukup, perlu juga adaptasi walaupun tidak banyak yang kita. Oleh karena itu development agenda untuk hal itu dalam sustainable development kita sebut sebagai low carbon development and climate resilient. Jadi bersamaan. Jadi melakukan kegiatan secara low carbon, mengurangi karbon terutama karena itu adalah emisi gas rumah kaca yang terbesar. Pada saat yang sama kita melakukan ketahanan terhadap climate adaptasi. Kira-kira seperti itu untuk yang global warming dan climate. Langsung yang kalau terkait dengan bagaimana terhadap kondisi-kondisi yang ada, sebenarnya nggak cuma kita yang sadar, global juga sadar, sehingga lahirlah kesepakatan bersama yang kita sebut dengan Sustainable Development tahun 92 di Stockholm. Jadi pembangunan itu harus berkelanjutan. Tetapi kan berkelanjutannya seperti apa menjadi pertanyaan ya. Ternyata disadari tahun 2000 dunia masih seperti ini juga. Oh, berarti berkelanjutannya harus ada goals yang jelas. Maka masuklah yang disebut sebagai Millennium Development Goals. Jadi ada goals terkait menyelamatkan manusia. Millennium Development Goal. Oleh karena itu tadi Pak Brian menyatakan Millennium Development Goal lebih pada proses untuk eradikasi kemiskinan ya, poverty eradication kayak gitu, penghapusan kemiskinan, konflik dan seterusnya yang berpusat secara antropogenik. Antropogenik itu berpusat pada kegiatan-kegiatan manusia. Ternyata itu juga nggak banyak mendongkrak kondisi planet kita, kan cuma satu ya, yang tinggal tambah banyak, kondisi makin, ternyata manusianya diperbaiki, konfliknya diperbaiki, lingkungannya bisa rusak juga. Dulu di MDGs goal lingkungan itu hanya satu dari 7 goal lainnya tentang sosial. Nah di tahun 2015 akhir September seluruh negara, hampir seluruh negara di dunia sepakat untuk ternyata kita harus beralih pada yang namanya Sustainable Development Goals. Pembangunannya tetap berkelanjutan tetapi goals-nya jelas. Maka dibagilah menjadi 17 tujuan, 169 target. Hari ini ada 247 indikator kalau pembangunan berkelanjutan itu mau dicapai. Tapi saya tidak akan bicara 247, terlalu repot. Cara simpel Indonesia mengatasi itu. Sebenarnya bagi adik-adik mahasiswa maupun para pelaku lainnya ada dua kata kunci untuk melakukan pembangunan berkelanjutan. Yang pertama adalah conservation yang dikatakan Pak Brian tadi. Jadi menjaga sesuatu yang penting buat kita untuk tetap bisa terjaga. Tapi kalau cuma menjaga kan kita nggak bisa hidup. Harus juga ada kegiatan ekonomi dan seterusnya. Kata kunci kedua adalah sustainable use, memanfaatkan secara berkelanjutan. Jadi dua kata itu yang jadi kita boleh menambang tapi harus sustainable use. Oleh karena itu kita paksa investornya harus good mining practice. Jadi menambangnya harus good mining. Kalau dia memanfaatkan hutan, perhutanan sosial, sosialnya dapat, tapi dia ada batas pemanfaatannya. Nah, kata kunci untuk memanfaatkan itu juga sebenarnya sangat mudah karena bicara terkait dengan daya dukung dan daya tampung, carrying capacity saja. Sama seperti perut kita, kalau melebihi kapasitasnya kan nggak enak ya. Jadi dalam pembangunan itu kalau boleh saya menganalogikan mungkin tidak tepat benar. Sama seperti Mas Ananta punya motor kan atau punya mobil ya. Komponen apa yang utama supaya mobil atau motor itu berjalan sampai tujuan? Bensin dijalankannya dikendalikannya oleh apa? Oleh supirnya, itu drivernya paling tidak pegang 3 hal ya. Setir, gas, dan rem. Kalau kita terlalu ngegas, nyeruduk dia. Jadi bisa berbahaya. Makanya perlu rem kan. Rem itulah konservasi. Gas itu adalah kegiatan ekonomi. Jadi harus menyeimbangkan antara rem gas sampai bisa sampai di tujuan. Kira-kira analoginya seperti itu. Jadi dalam supaya kita sampai di tujuan itu, goals yang kita tuju itu, kita harus menyeimbangkan antara rem dan gas dan ke arah yang benar, ke goals yang benar. Kira-kira seperti itu sih yang disebut sustainable development. Tapi perspektif pribadi saya terkait SDGs, konsep seperti itu mungkin bisa dipelajari secara akademis. Tapi yang paling utama dalam SDGs itu adalah behavior changes, perubahan perilaku. Jadi apapun kata kuncinya harus perubahan perilaku dari semua komponen yang ada di bumi ini. Karena kalau misalnya kan sebenarnya seperti yang dibilang Mahatma Gandhi, kita bumi ini tidak cukup untuk satu orang yang serakah. Jadi kalau serakah nggak akan pernah cukup, ngegas terus, nyeruduk kemana-mana, gitu kan. Jadi perlu wisdom atau perlu kebijakan yang tadi sustainable use and conservation secara seimbang dengan batasan daya dukung dan daya tampung, termasuk tadi kalau pertambangan itu sudah melewati daya dukung nggak boleh dilanjutkan karena itu akan merusak, jadi misalnya ada industri nih di mana di Jawa Barat buang limbah gitu kan, buang limbah itu harus ada ambang batasnya, nggak boleh limbah itu merusak lingkungan, jadi harus dia treatment dan seterusnya. Karena kalau itu sudah melewati ambang batas, itu akan merusak lingkungan. Kira-kira seperti itulah. Itu sederhananya, tapi saya kira diskusinya di kampus nanti Pak dosennya akan menerangkan secara teknis lebih jelas.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you banyak Pak Rahman. A great answer to a very tricky question, I think. Pak Brian atau Mbak Nana nih mau duluan?
Terima kasih. Karena pertanyaannya bahasa Indonesia, mungkin saya juga akan jawab bahasa Indonesia. Untuk yang global warming tadi mungkin sudah dijelaskan detail dengan Pak Rahman, jadi mungkin saya akan mencoba tentang bagaimana kita ingin menjadi negara yang high income tapi juga ingin mengkonserv lingkungan. Jadi seperti yang tadi pernah saya sebutkan, sebetulnya industri itu bisa mengadopsi prinsip-prinsip keberlanjutan dari safeguard yang dimiliki oleh international financial institution. Jadi misalnya ada AFC atau World Bank atau Asian Development Bank. Nah, di standar-standar safeguard tersebut ada banyak hal yang di-assess untuk financial institution itu mendanai sebuah project. Misalnya mengenai environmental management system. Jadi dari awal kita udah mengakses project tersebut apakah manajemen sistem di company tersebut cukup bagus untuk mengelola misalnya lingkungan dan segala macam, dan ada juga tentang pollution prevention dan climate change. Jadi ini beyond AMDAL regulation, karena kalau AMDAL kan hanya pollution prevention, sementara kalau di safeguard standar dari International Financial Institution juga mengakses bagaimana proyek ini akan melakukan adaptasi atau mitigasi terhadap climate change. Kemudian juga mengakses mengenai biodiversity, jika proyek itu misalnya berlokasi di hutan lindung, bagaimana kira-kira corrective action yang perlu dilakukan agar proyek atau bisnis ini bisa tetap berlanjut tapi juga tidak menghiraukan masalah biodiversity. Mungkin mungkin kurang lebih seperti itu. Kalau mau diskusi lebih lanjut seperti tadi disampaikan mungkin bisa dengan Pak dosen atau mungkin setelah ini bisa ngobrol lebih lanjut.
Alright, thank you Mbak Nana for sharing some really concrete tools yang bisa digunakan ya oleh para institusi perusahaan untuk memastikan aspek keberlanjutan. Pak Brian, silakan.
Sure. So your question, what negara, what state is most like Indonesia? I think I think you're close to Florida. I think might be similar in many ways. A lot of wetlands. It's very tropical environment. Louisiana and New Orleans. New Orleans is if back in I think it was 2005, we had a huge hurricane that went through there. Hurricane, um, a hurricane that went through there and really wiped it out in the flooding. New Orleans is a city that is essentially below sea level, and when a hurricane goes through there, it really causes a lot of damage. And so to the question of why climate change, why is it important in the United States, right? We're seeing we've always had hurricanes, but now we're seeing more of them in greater intensity. Stage 5 hurricanes that just high winds and it's the flooding, the water, the rain that come with it, and causes so much damage and sadly a lot of loss of life. And so even a country like the United States that has pretty good infrastructure is just not ready for that level of intensity of um, of hurricanes and storms. And we're seeing not even in the South where Florida and Louisiana are, for example, but also it happens where I'm from, outside of New York. Those hurricanes are making it up the coast, and places like New York and Connecticut, Boston are just not prepared for that level of destruction of intensity of hurricanes and storms. And out west, what we're seeing now with droughts is more forest fires in California and in Oregon, and so communities are losing their homes, and again also sadly losing lives for fires that are just out of control because it's so dry. And when there is a lightning storm, for example, it's something very natural like that, it just explodes into a fire and becomes out of control, and as is due to the fact um, that there's no rain there at times and there's just significant drought. Um, I also do want to share a little bit about the issues around countries in development and versus lack of in development or developed in where they are on that development path. I've spent a lot of time in Africa as well, in East and West Africa, and one thing you notice there is solar panels. Right, there are solar panels on uh, very poor households in very remote areas. And I don't see that very often here in Indonesia. And there's probably a number of reasons why, but in Africa, it's out of necessity, right? They're not connected to the grid, and if they want to charge their phone, if they want to have a fan, or they want to watch TV, have a cooler, the only way to access electricity is through solar panels. And so my point being is they've kind of they some of those countries they've made the jump over being they went from no electricity to being on the grid and skip that process and gone straight to clean energy, right? They don't have coal or fossil fuel powered electricity. They have clean energy, and I think there's opportunities for that in Indonesia as well. And here we're fortunate in Sumatra, Jawa, Bali to be connected to the grid, and typically we have electricity 24 hours a day. But in the more remote areas of Indonesia, particularly out in the east, um, there are opportunities for them to have solar panels or wind energy or other types of clean energy and just skip the the fossil fuel powered electricity. So so clean energy is not something just for the privileged, so the wealthy, developed countries. I think there's opportunities for certainly Indonesia to think about clean energy and essentially impacting climate change by having clean energy and less fossil fuels. So anyway, that's something that USAID is working on with the Ministry of of Energy and Mineral Resources as well, PLN, of how to transition away from fossil fuels and clean energy. So it's a work in progress, but there is significant potential.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Okay. Wait. Well, if I can contribute to that last question by Mamutia, I used to live in Hawaii for a year, so I think that's probably one of the closest places, in term, to the similar to Indonesia's climate. Um, yeah. um, yeah. So that could be another place if you would like to visit. A state that is similar in climate to Indonesia, Mamutia.
Let me add too. You should also, you said you haven't been to the United States. As you complete your undergraduate studies, there are opportunities for scholarships and study in the United States. U.S. Embassy is happy to support. I don't know if we have the financial resources for scholarships, but help you find scholarships. Any of you that are interested in studying in the United States, there are opportunities, and I know that universities would benefit from the diversity and the thinking from Indonesian students. So please explore opportunities.
Definitely, definitely. All right. Well, it's almost 6, ladies and gentlemen. But so I think we can wrap up our discussion for this afternoon right here. I think this is also my last session with at America, talking about SDGs with various experts, practitioners. I think it's been a valuable opportunity for me, and hopefully for you guys at home or at offices, and of course here in, at America. But if I can sum up a few, points of discussion from this afternoon, I think it's key to re-emphasize that environmental sustainability cannot be separated from social and economic development, and I think that's that shows how far we've progressed as a global community from the concept of sustainable development yang tadi Pak Rahman sampaikan ke millennium development where we're mainly concerned about poverty eradication and welfare, and now we're talking a more comprehensive, a more wholesome view of how we want to approach development, of how we as a global community want to step forward. And this is where I think I want to reiterate the "No One Left Behind" tagline. From at the beginning of this series, I learned that we always think that no one left behind means nggak ada yang tertinggal gitu. Berarti ya semua harus dibawa. Tapi kayaknya ada suatu makna atau another meaning that I have learned from this opportunity is that semua juga harus terlibat. Jadi bukan cuman soal semua harus dibawa, enggak, tapi gimana caranya semua pihak itu dilibatkan. How no one left behind also means everybody has to be involved. Dan itu kayaknya apa yang aku suka bilang kayak the magic tanda kutip ya of SDGs, and why it can bind us all regardless of backgrounds at whatever level we choose to act on. We have one guiding north star for development, and that is the SDGs. And so I am so grateful to Pak Brian, Mbak Nana, Pak Rahman for today, and also kakak-kakak dari Universitas Muhammadiyah Jakarta for joining us today. And I would like to sign off. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Okay, once again, let's give a big round of applause for our discussion today. Thank you, Pak Brian, Pak Rahman, Bu Dwi Payana, dan Kak Rizkina for the discussion. It was insightful discussion. Well, everyone, if you remember early in this event, we had a question of the day. The question was, which of the following is the nature-based solution to tackle the climate crisis? And the answer is A, mangroves. Shout out to Afif Sabri from YouTube for answering correctly. Well, everyone, if you have any ideas that you would like to have on Ad America States, feel free to submit your proposal to our website at www.adamerica.or.id. Select create a program and go to collaborate with us. All the event proposals will be reviewed and your event might be featured here soon. While you are on our website, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter to get our weekly event updates. Well, we are also on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AT America. If you want to get fun content, giveaways, and so much more, feel free to follow our social media and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, thank you so much for joining us, our friends from Universitas Muhammadiyah Jakarta, and also our friends joining us online. Thank you so much for joining us. See you at the next event. My name is Aninda, and bye bye.